Thank you, Sam.
Okay. I'm gonna, do we want to do the standing agenda items or?
Yeah, I'll put them down here. I guess we
Okay.
go through it and choose to omit the ones we don't care about.
Yeah.
New faces, I don't know. Anybody get a haircut? Shave a little bit. I know I need a shave.
Review outstanding spec PRs. I made a couple of meta spec PRs. One that just tries to map all the team leads to the various parts of the spec based on the suggestions we had, I think, discussed in that original Google Drive document, but I don't think we actually put it in the governance file. I also don't know if that mapping makes sense, but that was the original mapping that was previously discussed. So we can probably discuss whether we need to change that mapping or that should stay as it is. And I also made another pull request to remove the service binding spec because, oh, sorry, the CNB binding spec, because we, I think at some point decided we should remove it and put a deprecation notice on top of it, but we didn't actually do that. And also, since no team was mapped to that part of the spec, I thought now was a great time to remove it. Those were the only two meta ones.
How do we go about meta ones? Do those have to be have a TOC?
Right now, I just have it. Everything meta is just team leads. So just super majority of team leads. Everything else is just assigned to one specific team lead. But that's again like what I've proposed. I don't know if that's what we want to enforce. The first meta one, I've set it to TOC super approval. Once that's approved, we can just, if those set of responsibilities make sense, we can just rely on that.
Okay, cool.
So right now it's set to platform to implementation, build pack to BAT, distribution to distribution, project descriptor to platform, build pack registry to distribution, and everything else to team leads.
I was curious why the platform spec wouldn't be owned by the platform team.
I think this was discussed by Emily at some point, and she wanted the implementation team to own the platform spec because it's the life cycle that dictates the platform spec, and the platform is simply using it. Whereas the build pack spec is more end user driven. So like we're exposing that to build pack authors. I think that was the reasoning that was given for the BAT team to own the build pack spec and the implementation to own the platform. But again, that's why I said this was just something I put in there, and we can figure out if that makes sense or whether that needs to change.
Yeah, I find it interesting as well. I'm not sure that it's as well defined in my head based on what you just stated, Sam. But that being said, I have no real opposition to the platform spec being part of the implementation team, because I do agree that, you know, effectively they are the producers of the platform interface. And then we are more or less the consumers that leverage that. With that being said, I feel like that could also apply for the build pack spec. So I guess that's the part where I'm a little bit confused as to why there's the difference there. But again, maybe out of my, level of care, just sort of voicing that sort of discrepancy there.
I think the main difference was like the build pack spec is never aware of the life cycle, whereas the platform spec is.
But the life cycle or the implementation team is who more or less dictates what the build pack API should look like. Right? Similar to the platform API. Like everything, like if the build pack author team wanted to change something, they would have to get more or less buy-in from the implementation team in order to do so.
Wouldn't it be the other way around? Like the back team is proposing features and the implementation team would implement them, and as a course of that implementation, they would expose certain flags to the platform. Or at least that's how I've typically seen it work. Like we never go about proposing, here's what the platform spec should look like, and then have the lifecycle implemented. We typically go, here's what the build pack API changes should look like. The implementation, that team then implements it and then exposes certain things to the platform spec based on what they require. So like a recent example is the SBOM stuff, for example. Like we just said, this is what the build pack spec should look like. The implementation team implemented it, and during the course of that, we figured out that there were some flags that needed to be added. So like the next platform spec where we added those cache flags, that was not at all dictated by any end user changes. That was just the lifecycle team saying the platform needs to pass these flags to change how caching works.
Yeah, I guess you could see it the other way too, right? Like I could bring up maybe logging as another example where the platform team did make the request like, hey, we need to be able to toggle the verbosity. Like we wanted structured logging, right? But we didn't get to that point. And it was like, hey, we need this additional flag or this feature, right? And so that was a platform feature. At the end of the day, it just means that there's collaboration from both sides of the coin. I don't know that, it's always one way or the other. And I think that's what adds to my sort of confusion of the misalignment. Again, don't really care, not going to die on a hill, just an interesting fact.
Yeah, I mean, I was hoping there would be more folks from the TOC who made the decision to actually help us with it. But like I literally took what I saw in the document and put it in the PR. And I think
And I'm assuming this could change too, right? So it's not like set in stone.
it's not set in stone. So that's why it was just like a pull request for the TOC to review and suggest changes. So I think like we should probably record these changes on the pull request along with the arguments. And if we want to figure out a way that like we want to co-share specs between teams so that both the team leads need to approve it, we might want to add that or not. Like I would say just add those as comments on the pull request.
Yeah. If we ever do our spec refactor, then it would be clear. Okay, the platform team owns the platform spec, the implementation team owns the, well, I don't know what spec, what would it be called, but lifecycle spec.
Lifecycle spec. At that point, is that even a spec?
Yeah, I think the problem is twofold, right? Like one of them is what does ownership really mean? Because in a lot of these cases, we're effectively crossing a bridge or trying to connect two dots. That's the whole point of an interface, right? So typically means that two people should work very closely together to ensure that both sides know what the end result is and agree to that end result. So I don't know, effectively what it sounds like to me is that maybe we should have, two I don't know, 2 code owners per each one of these, the people that are collaborating on such thing.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. We can just add 2.
Cool. I'll add that comment, and again, I will put it on there as just an opinion.
I mean, we are the ones who will have to deal with this at the end of the day. So I think
Yeah,
our
what does the
opinions
TOC
matter.
do?
Our
In this
opinions
case-
matter
In this case, is it the TOC that should be reviewing this?
because it's the first time that this is happening. And previously it was owned by the core team. That's why it's still a pull request, and there are still 3 code reviews required from someone in the core team. If you
Okay.
check the review requirements, it still says 3 code reviews required. So
Okay, so right now I'm just trying to convince both of you, plus I believe Joe, right? Because he's in a team lead as well right now, interim. And so I'm trying to convince you all then, if it makes sense to have 2 per spec.
I think this initial pull request, you'll have to convince the TOC. Everything else.
Right. But I'm sure they'll do whatever we tell them, right? Since
Yes.
to your point, we'll be the ones that are dealing with it.
Yep.
Natalie, what are your feelings about having 2 code owners per spec?
It'd just be reflective of, like, you know, how the actual governance model before didn't require unanimous consent from the core team, but in practice we would always just chase everyone down because we wanted to make sure that there was consensus. And I think in practice, you know, you're always going to want, like, if we have as a platform change, you know, you're always going to want to make sure that the lifecycle implemented, like whoever's implementing the lifecycle and whoever's owning the platform part of things, like, that they agree. So in practice, we're always going to look for 2 people to be in agreement.
I don't know. There's been scenarios where an individual may take, I don't want to use the word advantage, but will definitely leverage, right? The ability to move things forward and so I think that's the thing, really, ultimately, that's what we're trying to do here, right? Is to some extent, notify and have the right people involved in certain conversations. And so if in this particular case, let's say platform, right? Because I could speak to that one. There's a platform change coming, right? I'm pretty sure I would want to know and have some sort of, you know, at least up or down vote on that. And if I choose not to vote on it, right, based on our governance rules, then it's a given approval, right?
That's for RFCs though, not for spec PRs. The spec PRs, I think the governance model was one team lead owns it and merges it.
Are we getting to the thing about approvals versus reviewers?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yep. Because like currently everyone on the team leads is going to get a notification anyway. It's just that this specific person needs to approve it for it to go through. It's the same thing as our RFCs. Like for every team that owns it, like the team lead needs to start the voting period, but after that, anyone can object.
Okay. So in that case, how does that translate to code owners? Maybe I just need a little bit of a refresher or context there. So what does code owners effectively do?
You can take a look at what I have there. It will require that any change to those specific files is approved by that specific team, but at the same time, it also requests a review from everyone there. So like in this case, it will request a review from everyone in the team leads, which is a superset of all the individual team leads. So If there's a platform change, all the team leads will be notified, but the implementation team lead has to review it and approve it.
Okay. I'm comfortable with that. Because again, I think that aligns with our sort of overall model of lazy consensus. Right? So as a platform maintainer or platform team lead, if I neglect this piece, right, then that's on me.
But you will be notified. It's just that, like, your approval, like we'll probably not wait for the respective person's approval if they're not the code owner. But if the request changes, then yeah, it will count.
Have we discussed windows or timeframes for those? I know that the governance changes kind of left it up in the air. Have we determined what we feel to be appropriate?
I think they just left it to us to figure out how to deal with that.
Right.
I think for RFCs, the general 1 week comment period makes sense to me. We've been following that for a while, and I think once the team lead for that RFC determines that it's time to start voting, they can give a 1 week period, and then if everyone agrees, it goes to final comment, I guess.
Yeah.
So 1 week prior to final comment for all the team leads to say yes or no, and then final thing for like final 1 week for final comment from everyone who wants to make any comments to it.
Oh, so effectively it would be 2 weeks.
Unless there's unanimous agreement from all the team leads. I think that was a clause at some point in our RFC, but it was never followed. It said that if there's unanimous agreement from everyone in the core team, it will be merged immediately without the FCP, but we never followed that.
As Natalie puts it, in practice, right? We're kind of. I guess, is there an opposition to just having the FCP without the pre-voting period? Like in my mind, that seems easier and easier to consume. It's like, this is your final comment period, AKA voting period.
Fine by me.
Well, because it would make sense to me that the final comment period comes before voting, right? Because it's like, I think it said that you can't make any changes in the voting period,
Correct.
right? So you do need some notice. It's like, okay, last chance to make any changes, go through and add all your nits and, anything you want to see, make it into the final thing that gets merged, right? And then there's that period of like, okay, this is it, right?
I am curious how this is going to, play out, especially the first few couple times, right? Because before anybody gets notified, it's supposed to be like finalized, right? Like you were supposed to have already had conversations with individuals, maybe had them look at stuff or whatever, right?
Yep.
But as an owner or champion, whatever team lead of the RFC, like when you say, hey, this is now up for voting, it should be kind of crystallized.
Yep.
And so then the only, outcomes are accepted or rejected. I would assume that the first couple may get rejected, right? And so they'd be rejected. We go back to the drawing board, hypothetically speaking, and do a second revision of voting. But the whole goal is to minimize those second revision voting periods. Because I mean, ultimately, I'd like to eliminate having to have everybody look at stuff before the voting period. But I don't know how realistic that is.
You will have had to look at it before the voting period, because if you have any feedback at all, like, it will not be possible to incorporate your feedback without going through an entire new round of voting. It puts really a lot of responsibility on the shepherd.
It does. I think that's kind of the catch-22, right?
Yeah. I
Is-
would assume that whoever is shepherding it would start the voting period once they've had consensus from all the team leads that are active. If they notice that, like, there are folks that are not active, like they're on vacation or they're not replying, and they probably wouldn't have interest in it, they can start the vote. And then,
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
so it's like, for example, let's take the signer binary as an example. Like, at this stage, we think it's close to completion. The only folks that, like, we probably need to figure out some things between the team lead and the author, but once those are figured out, we can put it to a vote and have it finished in a week. I think everyone who wanted to say something at this point has had a chance to say something.
And I don't know if you all have seen it, but it's funny that we're talking about this, where Emily, I think, has an RFC for the RFC process on the
Yeah.
amendments. Right, and if you haven't seen that, that's where I kind of take this mentality of, when we get to a voting stage, we should have already done a lot of the due diligence.
Yeah.
Okay, be right back. My lunch was left outside my door, so I'm gonna go.
I think we're close to ending this meeting anyway, and we just discussed this. I think I want to set the items for tomorrow before we close off.
Yes, for sure. I think that makes sense.
I think Bloomberg folks wanted to continue the PID 1 discussion. So
Which one, sorry?
the PID 1, PID 1 and launcher.
Is there an RFC for that or anything like that?
There's an issue on the RFC repository.
All right, got it.
We have how to handle the scaffolding. Probably, I think we should talk about it. The scaffolding RFC and what to do with the signer RFC and how to manage teams and stuff.
Is the scaffolding still an open one? I thought we came to a conclusion on that one.
I mean, if we have a conclusion, we can just like confirm with Aiden and start the voting period then.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Like, I'll review it once. If I have any issues with it, I'll reach out to Aiden. And
Yeah.
then my sort of action item or goal is to start the voting period.
Yep.
This
And it's the signer one. I don't know what we want to do with that.
Yeah, that one's a little bit more interesting, because I think the last questions I posed to you is something I'd like to see, check the temperature of everybody else on whether or not the order of operations seems
Yeah.
appropriate or accurate. So I think we have 2 thus far. Is there another one?
The governance things, like for handling maintainership of individual repositories.
Do you think it would make sense to talk about stack removal? Just like, we keep saying we need maybe a dedicated meeting for it, but I think that just having a brief conversation would be helpful, because I don't even know the scope of what it is we need to talk about, right?
That's what I was gonna say. What do we want to talk about? regarding stack removal. All I know is that it's sort of behind on the Docker file stuff.
I think it's not an immediate pressing concern, and I think last time we decided like Jesse was gonna drive a bunch of this, and Terrence is interested in it, and both of them are busy, and I think Emily is also not gonna be able to make it tomorrow. I don't know. So most of the folks who might have had interest in it will probably not be able to make it tomorrow at the very least. But I thought like we could proceed with the first phase of Docker files without stack removal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we wanted to wait for some of that to be released before stack removal. But again, I don't necessarily know all the details.
I guess there's a question of like, if you switch the run image and your new run image has different mix-ins, like it's, at what point would the platform, like would the platform need to validate the mix-ins to be spec? Like the thing is, the spec as it's written right now, it's not reflective of reality. It says that the lifecycle will validate mix-ins, but the lifecycle does not, right? Like we leave that up to the platform. And so it's sort of, I don't know. I don't think it should block. I don't think that the stack removal should be blocking phase 1 of Docker files. But
I mean, it's all experimental, right?
yeah.
I mean, we can probably discuss that in the spec PR for the Docker files phase 1 removal. I don't know if like at least that specific bit on where to do mix and validation if we keep stacks around.
Okay. I'll keep that on the agenda then. So Docker file plus stack removal strategy. And then we could discuss that tomorrow. It does seem like an interesting topic. I just don't know how actionable. But at least we could maybe start the conversation.
Cool. I think that's it.
That's it. All right. See you all.